Ready. Welcome, Notre Dame fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast.
Notre Dame fans, we have some beef today, Vince and I. We have beef today. So I'm on day 3 of my no pop and no Mountain Dew trying to get healthier kick. And as we're playing the 30-second intro, Vince is down there dancing while chugging on a giant can of Coke. Not cool, man. Not cool at all. You're just trying to make me stronger. Is that what you're doing, Vince?
Well, see, what the people don't know is when I'm at school, I don't usually have carbonated beverages, and you used to. And so you would get your big glass of Mountain Dew, and you'd be drink, which is also my favorite drink.
I hid that it was Mountain Dew. I put it in a cup.
Well, you would drink it, and you'd be like,
Okay, I did do that, so I guess I kind of deserve it. So let's get some Notre Dame football. So I do deserve it. Let's get to some Notre Dame football.
So welcome, everybody. Sorry we're a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties getting started, but here we are for our Friday mailbag, and we are fired up, man. I love Fridays. This is my favorite day of the week thus far, and we are going to kick things off a little bit differently than normal, Brian. You're hearing a few things team-wise, some insider tips, if you will.
Sure.
And I'm going to let you kick things off with that before we jump into some of the questions and things.
It's nothing earth-shattering, just some things I've been able to gather talking to different people. Number one is Jarrett Patterson is supposed to be getting some – he's supposed to be getting on the path to recovery here maybe today, kind of getting some things taken out and getting on that path. He's going to be limited in the spring. But the one thing I did hear about him is that it does look like they are going to try to move him to left tackle.
Yeah.
That is something they're going to try. It's not necessarily written in stone, especially if he's going to be limited in the spring. There's always a chance that somebody could really step up and look great there and say, hey, look, we're comfortable with, so-and-so, Tosh Baker, Andrew Kristofic, Quinn Carroll, somebody like that, Blake Fisher, whoever. Could look good there, and they would end up putting him back inside. But as of right now, the plan is that they are going to try to put him inside. Another thing that I've heard is that offensively, I've heard Jack Cohn during team drills and during workouts and during 7-on-7s has looked really good. There's a lot of people that are impressed with how well he throws the ball.
Good.
He's shown a lot of command, as far as like organizing workouts and showing early leadership, which is good, but not forcing it. It's been a natural thing. And then, of course, 2 receivers that I keep hearing, no matter who I talk to, that are really looking good during. Again, these are just during 7-on-7s and workouts and things like that. They haven't had a single practice yet. I think they're going to start practice about a week from today. And maybe next weekend. I've heard 2 different dates. I've heard 27th, 25th as the 2 dates for work, official spring practice. So nothing official. This is like just the players working out together. That Jordan Johnson and Lorenzo Styles have both really looked good. And I've heard about Lorenzo Styles from multiple people, and not from for a freshman, he looks really good, but just that, he looks really good.
Yeah, right. There's no caveat that he's a freshman. Yeah.
Right. And so, and it doesn't surprise me. I mean, we talked about him. He was a top 100 recruit on our grading system. He was the number 3 offensive recruit in this class behind Tyler Buckner and Blake Fisher. So I'm not surprised, but that's good to see. And Jordan Johnson's looked good. He's staying, keeping his head on straight and doing things that we know he's capable of doing. And then I've also heard that Xavier Watts is actually going to be working at the W, not Jordan Johnson, for the beginning of spring. Now, we'll see how long that lasts, but I think it's more of a just moving guys around, trying to get guys comfortable is really where I see this kind of being. And I don't know how healthy Kevin Austin is going to be this spring with the foot injury. So they need some guys there, and Xavier's a big, strong kid. So that is kind of some of the stuff we've heard. Again, nothing earth-shattering, nothing that we're saying, oh gosh, this is incredible. But and I do expect both Ryan Barnes and Philip Riley to start in the boundary, not be the starters, but to both start in the boundary, and then kind of see which one of those 2 guys really emerges. Okay. And then the other guy would then go compete somewhere else potentially, unless Cam Hart doesn't step up, and then they're both going to be playing the boundary.
Yeah.
So that really like what they've seen from the two freshmen early enrollees so far as well. So those are just a couple little nuggets that we've gathered so far from spring practice, or not from spring practice, but from winter workouts pre-spring practice. And we'll try to let you guys know. And I am told that the plan is they're hoping to have a blue gold game. The only debate that I'm hearing right now is who's going to be allowed to be there.
Well, and I did hear that same thing about the blue gold game. Right now they're only allowing parents, special guests, and things like that to spring sporting events. But they said the blue gold game, they haven't decided yet. So is it going to be family members only? Is it going to be open to the public, to the media?
I just hope they have it. I mean, if they don't let fans be there, then I understand that, because you can televise it. But I think it'd be good for the kids to kind of have that, and to have parents there at the very least. So that would be good. So anyway, so that's the little bit of just a few tidbits. I'm going to keep digging, keep trying to find out, what I'm hearing. But I was glad to hear about Jack Cohn kind of taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and that he's really impressed people with how well he throws the football. And my stance on that, Vince. That's a guy that's a guy that I think is going to win the quarterback job, and I do think he's got a chance to be a very good player. I think in Notre Dame's offense, excuse me, especially if they open things up a little bit, I think he could put up some really impressive numbers. I think he's a much better quarterback than you might think based on his numbers. I think that has more to do with the Wisconsin offense than it does with him, especially when you look at how much better his numbers were than every other quarterback since Russell Wilson. I mean, I don't think anybody was within 5 percentage points of his completion percentage in 2019, and that was against, had to play Ohio State twice, had to play Oregon in the Rose Bowl, and played Michigan's defense, a team that beat Notre Dame by 35. Beat Penn, had to play Penn State, had to play Minnesota on the road. Minnesota was a top 10 team, so he wasn't playing a bunch of cupcakes either. He was out there playing good teams and completed almost 70% of his passes. And then off quarterbacks were below 60% and barely over 60%. He was at 69, and he wasn't exactly surrounded by the world's greatest weapon. So it was good to hear that, how he's made that transition so far. So that was encouraging.
Well, one of your tidbits had to do with the wide receiver. So I want to start. I want to start with a question that we got kind of, I don't know if you want to call it off the air before the show. And it came from Ryan, and he wants you to explain the difference between the W, the X, the Y, the different wide receiver positions within the Notre Dame offense, and then maybe, what are the characteristics of the guys that you put into those positions?
Well, first of all, and I'm going to, as we're talking here, I'm going to try to see if I can pull up a game from last year to kind of show this on the screen. But the W it's first of all, the W, X, and the Z primarily, first and foremost, the thing you have to understand about it is it tells people where to line up.
Right.
So when you call a formation, whether it's, 3x1, 2x2, whatever the case may be, guys have to know, okay, I'm the W, because that's going to tell them where to line up. And that it also is going to help you understand what your route responsibilities are going to be within each play. So you're going to call a play. We're calling smash with a backside, post dig. You've got to know, am I the X? Am I the Z? Am I the W? Because it's going to tell me if I'm front side, if I'm boundary, whatever the case may be. And then that's going to determine who lines up where. So those are the things that I look for, first and foremost, to explain who does what. And so that's the first thing that you have to understand about those positions is it just tells people who's going to line up where. And so W is the boundary position. The X is the field outside position. And then the Z is the slot position.
Right.
And so that's kind of how those things look from an alignment standpoint. And so now, specific what you look for, the W is usually a guy that's going to be bigger because you want a guy that can win one-on-one. It doesn't have to be a bigger guy, but usually it is a bigger guy that at least has an impressive catch radius. Because of how Notre Dame runs their offense, it's a lot of back shoulders, it's a lot of go routes, it's a lot of work in the middle of the field on some post digs and some drags and things along those lines, some corner routes, things that require just a bigger catch radius and more importantly, being able to win in one-on-ones, because as we've talked about with the boundary corner, you're not usually going to give as much help to the boundary corner. You're going to have your better corner there because especially against Notre Dame, because teams, unless a team is just left right by who they are, they're going to have their best corner in the boundary because Notre Dame's not a tempo team. So they're going to have a boundary corner.
Right.
Because the only thing that gets you out of being field boundary is tempo. Well, Notre Dame doesn't really push the tempo on teams. So the boundary corner's boundary receivers a lot of times going to go against the other team's best corner, or at least the most physical corner.
Right. It's big on big, if you will.
Usually. And usually good on good as well.
Right.
So you've got to be able to win those contested throws. And if you think of some of the big plays that Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin, and even last year, Javon McKinley against Clemson, some of the big plays he made were contested throws. They weren't, I'm wide open. They were, hey, I got to go outplay that guy for the football. To the field, he says it's with the X, it's you want a guy that can be a good route runner. He's got to be able to have some – you'd ideally like a guy that can do things after the catch. Now, last year, obviously, Notre Dame didn't really have that. Ben Skowronek wasn't really a guy that was going to do things after the catch. He was more of a precise route runner kind of type of guy. This is a guy ideally you want to be able to have to stretch the field. You want him to be able to take the top off the defense. If in an ideal world – if your outside X can be a Will Fuller type, because that's what Will Fuller played at Notre Dame. You had Chris Brown mostly into the boundary. Will Fuller was normally to the field. If you can have a guy that can take that post route over the top, then and if you have to respect that as a defense, then that's going to put you in a situation where now there's a little bit more room to work for your slot and for your tight ends, because you have that burner that can take the top off the defense. That's why we've seen Braden Lindsey play that position more often than not. Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin were the two outside guys in 2018. And so the reason you had Chase Claypool to the field and Miles to the boundary, even though Chase was the boundary guy in 2019, is because Chase was better after the catch. And he was more of a pure vertical player. Miles could get vertical, but it was with this kind of a size but sure. Chase could actually, just outrun you and outplay you a little bit more. His game speed to me was better than Miles Boykin, even though Miles had I think hundredths of a second faster 40 time at the combine.
And that's why you want to give them more room to work. That's why you put them on the field side.
Right. Now, at Alabama, you'll see Devontae Smith line up all over the place. And ideally that's where you'd like to be. You'd like to be able to kind of move your guys around based on game plans and matchups and things like that. But Notre Dame doesn't do quite as much of that. And so when you also look at it, the Z, that's where we've seen the greatest diversity at Notre Dame. 2017, the starting Z was Chase Claypool. In 2019 and 2018, the starting Z was Chris Fink. You couldn't get a more different type of body type and players. And so how that is used depends on the player. With Chase Claypool, he was a great blocker. He was a guy that would work the middle of the field, the deep stuff, a lot of drags, a lot of deep in cuts. He would kind of run a lot of seam routes. Chris Fink, it was more about, option routes and slants and things where he can work himself open because he was a really good route runner. That's something that's important. I don't think you necessarily need to have a small guy at the slot. I think you can be effective with a bigger player as long as he's got some quickness and he can win at the line of scrimmage. Because what you're going to do first and foremost with your slot defenders against the Z is you want to jam and reroute. And if you don't have a guy that's a good route runner, or a guy that can't, even big guys can get jammed and rerouted if they don't know how to run routes. You have to have someone that's quick enough to win at the line and win against those reroutes. Because if you can jam up the Z, a lot of times that's going to throw off the whole timing of the pass concept because you're running some sort of layered concept. And if that guy's thrown off, then it kind of throws off the timing. And one of the issues Notre Dame had last year in the pass game is the spacing a lot of times was off. You guys would be way too condensed. And a lot of that was because they didn't have guys that were great at winning off the line, especially, Ben Skowronek was just not great at winning off the line. So there were a lot of times where they would just get too condensed, which makes it easier because now one guy can play two. One zone defender can play two guys. So that kind of explains it. If you have if you have two guys that can be good after the catch, that's great to have at Z and X. You don't necessarily need them to, if you just have one, it doesn't have to be the X or the Z. It's just whoever it can be. You can do things like in 2017, for example, Chase Claypool was the Z, but when they would run some of their perimeter screens, they would just kind of invert and have him block, or you could move him around and stack. There's a lot of different things you can do in order to get your outside guy the ball in space if you need it, if your Z is not a guy that can really play that. But ultimately, I'd like to see them do more things where in a lot of offenses, Vince, you know this, they'll teach you have to know it all. You may start off as a W, but eventually want to get you to where you could do different things because that gives you so much more diversity, because you could then come out one series and just go big, and you've got like Kevin Austin in the boundary, you've got Jordan Johnson and Deion Colsey to the field, or vice versa. Or next series you could come out and you have Xavier Watts in the boundary, and you've got Lorenzo Styles and Avery Davis out there, and you're much smaller and faster. But as long as guys understand the whole concept and what good teams, and I don't know if Notre Dame does this or not, honestly. I'm not saying they do or don't, but for me, what you ideally want to do is you want to have where you teach concepts. You don't teach this is you as a boundary. This is the concept. And the number one outside guy runs this concept or this route in this concept. The number two guy has to run this route, this concept. The backside number one has to run this route within this concept. So then if you move guys around, you understand the entire concept. Number one, it gives you more versatility. But number two, when guys have a greater understanding of the whole concept, they know what they can and can't do on their route. Hey, I can't cheat on this route to get open, because if I go 2 extra yards deeper to get open, then I'm now getting underneath that guy's route. And that's so those are the reasons that you need to do that. I would imagine Notre Dame teaches that way. When I say I don't know, it's simply I have no idea. It's not saying I don't know because they don't look like they teach it that way. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that.
Do you want to hit that other question we had prior, or do you want to hit one of the new ones, Brian?
Let's get some of these new ones.
All right, let's see here. I'm going to go with the very first one, the one we talked about before we got on, about MT41 says Jalen Sneed crystal balled to ND. I don't know if that's a question, if that's a statement, but I'm going to let you do your thing on this one, Brian. And I'm going to step out just for a second because I have to return a phone call that apparently is super important. So I will be right back, and I will let you explain this.
Sounds good. So what you're referring to there is MT41 said, we'll show it again, Anna Hickey, who runs the 247 Clemson site, crystal balled, I believe, today, Jalen Sneed to Notre Dame. Now, that's important because Clemson obviously is a player for Jalen Sneed, and he's from South Carolina. And I don't know Anna Hickey to be someone who throws crystal balls out, kind of willy-nilly, to use an old person term. So if she's doing that, that's a great sign. Now, I wrote an article yesterday at irishbreakdown.com where I mentioned Jalen Sneed in my What's Next article for linebacker recruiting. And I said Notre Dame's pushing for him. So, I mean, I'm not surprised that they're in it. But if she's hearing that Notre Dame is leading for him or could potentially get him, that's huge news for Notre Dame. He is an extremely talented linebacker, highly ranked linebacker. And to go into South Carolina and get a guy that is wanted by several SEC schools and is a guy that is considered one of the best linebackers in the country, that would be a huge recruiting win. Now, I'm not saying that I'm hearing that because I'm not, but honestly, I haven't really had a conversation about Jalen Sneed in a couple weeks, so I couldn't tell you if she's accurate or not. I don't know Anna to just throw things like that out there without having some good reason to do so. She used to cover Notre Dame for 247 Sports. Didn't know her real well, but knew her a little bit. But she kind of had a reputation of if she was going to make a prediction, she had good reason to do so. So I found that be interesting. And this is a kid that Rivals ranks as the number 63 player in the country. This is a kid that 247 Sports ranks as the number 97 player in the country. This is a very, very talented football player. He's got offer lists. Alabama has offered him. Florida's offered him. Florida State's offered him. Michigan's offered him. Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, Texas A&M, USC, Virginia Tech. So this is a kid that's got offers from all over the country. And if he's looking at Notre Dame that seriously, that's huge. But this is what we've been talking about all along, right? It's this Marcus Freeman effect of he is willing to A, fight for top players, and B, is connecting with them. Look, you're never going to get a kid like that if you don't try.
Right.
And that's been one of my issues with these guys in the past is they just don't even compete for some of those guys, or they're so late to the dance. So I think the fact that Marcus Freeman is making this push and Notre Dame seems to be doing well is a great sign, in my opinion, Vince. So while we're talking here, Vince, and asking a few more questions, let's just show some highlights of Jalen Sneed here These are sophomore highlights of him playing linebacker. I'm putting the sophomore highlights up because his junior film is of him. This is from Huddle. His junior film of him is him playing defensive end at 6'1", 210 pounds and just blasting people. So it's very interesting film to watch, but he's a very talented player. And if Notre Dame is legitimately that much of a contender, I mean, I knew they liked him. I knew they were pushing for him, but it was one of those ones where I'm like, yeah, that's going to be a tough one. A top 100 player from South. Yeah, when was the last time Notre Dame got a top 100 player from South Carolina? I think the last guy they got from South Carolina, period, was Chris Brown in the 2012 class, I believe. I can't think of another player from South Carolina that Notre Dame has landed since then. So it's not a state that they go and get I know Everett Golson was from South Carolina, but it's not a state they normally have a great deal of success landing players. So it just goes to show the Marcus Freeman effect is alive and well, and it's a great sign for Notre Dame, and it's shaping up to be just a great linebacker class. We actually got asked a question. I got asked a question before the show, and about the linebacker class and about how good that group can be, and look, there's probably 7 or 8 guys on the board right now that if Notre Dame got any combination of those 7 or 8, it's going to make for an outstanding class. I mean, you just have to be impressed with what Notre Dame is doing on defensive recruiting. I mean, it is really, really impressive to see what this class is doing. And Jalen Sneed is one of those guys that could be that game changer. Saban James just said Troy Pride. I forgot all about that one. Yes, thank you for reminding me of that. Saban James said that. So I can't believe I forgot about Troy Pride from Greer, South Carolina. That's not good. But still, it's not a lot. And Troy Pride was part of the 2016 class. So, so that's kind of where we're at with them. So that's some clips you've seen of Jalen Sneed. This kid is a flat-out ball player. That would be a big one. And he's the kind of guy that you don't tell him to hold off because you're waiting on somebody else.
Right.
If he wants to come, you say, okay, let's do this.
All right, Brian, let's go. It just says Facebook user, which is okay. But it's still
that's not their fault. So for whatever reason,
it's not their fault. I agree with you.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, when people are so that is from Terry Tyler.
Oh, so there you go.
It's not translating from Facebook to the chat for some reason. So that's from Terry Tyler.
All right. Well, Terry says, do you guys think we will see any freshman running backs see any playing time? And if so, who might that be? Yeah,
I think we'll see them. I think we could see both of them at some point in time. That's what I love about the new redshirt rule, because you can play up to 4 games and still redshirt. I think that, Sebo Flemister did some nice things last year, but I don't think it's a situation where he is locked into that number 3 spot. I think the freshman will get an opportunity to come in and challenge him. And he's going to have to battle to play. But even if he does play well, you're still going to see a 4th back at some point in time. I mean, we've seen it almost every year at Notre Dame where the 3rd and 4th running backs are going to get 15, 20 carries during the course of the season. And I also think there's some merit to kind of having a niche role for one of those big guys if they can prove themselves. And, when you look at, a guy like Audric Estime, he's 6 foot, 6'1", 215 pounds. He's a big, thick kid. I could see him being a, goal line short yardage guy. If you want to take a little bit of that wear and tear off of Kyron Williams, I could see a scenario where you want to get real creative and put Kyron Williams at the tailback and put Audric Estime or Logan Diggs as the running back to kind of be a lead blocker, or you can run some read zone stuff with if you want to get creative. You guys know we're all about, just having some fun of being creative. And I could see Logan Diggs being a guy that early in his career becomes a weapon on 3rd down, especially in 2-back sets, because he's 6 foot, he's over 200 pounds, he's got great feet, he's a good pass blocker, and he's a really good pass catcher. So those guys are going to have a chance to come in and play legitimate snaps this year. I mean, and if you look at like 2018, for example, Notre Dame had 4 running backs with at least 22 carries. They had 3 running backs with at least 72 carries that year. So if one of those guys is able to beat out Sebo Flemister, then they're going to get carries. And you look at 2017, Josh Adams had 206 carries, Deion McIntosh had 65, Dexter Williams had 39, and Tony Jones Jr. had 44. So you had 4 backs with at least 39 carries. So I could certainly see a scenario in which you have a third and potentially a fourth running back. And if you get to 4, it's definitely going to be a freshman.
Right.
And so, yeah, I could see those guys playing. And running backs just are guys you rarely want to redshirt anyway. I mean, when was the last time you saw a 5th-year running back really do a whole lot? I mean, Tony Jones would have been the guy that of course, the Tony Jones is going to come back for a 5th year. Nope. He still went pro. So I don't see that as being, unless a guy is undersized or maybe making a position change. He was a receiver, but or linebacker or something, whatever. Then I just don't see the benefit in redshirting running back. So I'd like to see both of them get some opportunities this year, not just in mop up duty. If they prove themselves capable, give them some opportunities, find a niche for them in some of those. Like we talked about Tyler Buckner, it's not against Wisconsin or USC. It's Toledo. Get him some early carries against Toledo. Get him some early carries against a Purdue or Navy or something like that. Those are where I'd like to see those guys get some work.
Okay, Brian, David has an interesting question that I want to get to here. He says, Brian and Vincenzo, could ND run 4 wide receivers and just blaze opponents out and march down the field? General Sherman's scorched earth policy. Let me tell you, there's many reasons I like this question. Number 1, I think it's great when you call me Vincenzo. Number 2, you brought a social studies reference in here, and I love every second of that as well. I want to tackle this first. Could Notre Dame do that? Do they have the ability to do that? Do they have the guys on the roster to do that? Yes, they absolutely do. And I think that they have the quarterbacks that can pull the trigger and do that. I do. Will they do that? I don't see them doing that. I don't see them taking tight ends off the field. Could they do it with a Michael Mayer potentially? Put him in the slot, put him in the boundary as one of those 4 guys out there catching balls? Yes, I think he could be that guy. But I think what you're thinking about is just 4 wide receivers.
Just 10 personnel. Yeah, just 10 personnel.
They have the ability. I just don't see them pulling that trigger. That's not in their repertoire of things that they want to do. I just don't see it happening.
I think there's good reason for that. When you look at Notre Dame, we've rarely seen them in 10 personnel. I think we saw maybe a little in 2016 in some 2-minute stuff. They're rarely in 10 personnel. And I get that because from 2010 to 2012, were you going to take Kyle Rudolph off the field? And then he got hurt, and then it was Tyler Eifert's team. Sure. And then you had Troy Nicholas, a 2nd-round pick, and then it was Ben Koyak, and then it was Alize Jones, and then it was Durham Smythe, and then it was back to Alize Jones, and then it was Cole Kmet, and this year it was Michael Mayer and Tommy Tremble. It's like when you have those guys, I don't know what advantage 10 personnel does for you. And in a lot of Brian Kelly's tenure at the very beginning, your 3rd tight end was way better than your 3rd and 4th wide receiver. I mean, that was just the case.
That's just a fact, yeah.
Right. And so that was early in his tenure. That's not the case in recent seasons. But I just don't know if 10 personnel really adds a lot for you as anything other than like a changeup. Look, I always think there's merit to saying, hey, we're going to throw a little something different at you.
Sure.
We're going to come out in 10 personnel and we're going to have Kevin Austin and Jordan Johnson and Avery Davis and Xavier Watts or Lorenzo Styles or Lawrence Keys or Deion Colsey or Joe Wilkins Jr. Like, pick your 4. And we're going to throw some stuff at you. We're going to go tempo. We're going to push it. We're just going to go 1,000,000 miles an hour, and we're going to have 2 plays called at once, and which is what teams do. They go tempo. You have 2 plays called, so you run one, and the second call, you just line up and execute that second play. There's no call that needs to be made. Tempo teams do that quite a bit. So I think there's always merit to that, but I would never push Notre Dame to, I'm all for creativity, but when your creativity tells Michael Mayer to go stand on the sideline, I don't know if that's something I necessarily want to do very often.
Sure.
Yeah.
Omar has a question that I do like because we've all seen the pot of gold going out to all the recruits, right? It's been all over social media. Does it include an emphasis on keeping in contact and finishing with top recruits?
Yeah, I think it signifies a lot of things, Omar. I think it signifies, number 1, Notre Dame's desire and understanding that you have to get involved with top players early.
Yes, and
you have
are.
to.
Yeah.
And they haven't in the past. And so this is one of the changes that Mike Elson is bringing, in my opinion, including we're seeing an expanded recruiting emphasis in Texas. They're offering a lot of kids in Texas. California, they're getting back to being more volume recruiting in California. In Arizona, we're seeing them make more of a push. This is the most active Notre Dame has been in Florida in several years. And I think there was a hesitancy to go back into Florida because they had some guys get in trouble down there. Dexter Williams got in trouble. Tavon Coney got in trouble. Kevin Stepherson got in trouble. Deion McIntosh got in trouble. There's a lot of Kevin Austin got in trouble, and he was from a really good private school. So I think there was some nervousness about going back down there, but I think now they're saying, hey, look, we're going to do our due diligence. We're going to get on kids early. We're going to find out who is and isn't a fit, but we got to get involved early if we're going to have a chance. And to your point about does it include keeping a contact and finishing with top recruits, I think we're seeing that, especially on defense. I don't know if we see that on offense yet. Hopefully we'll see that soon. But on defense, I mean, just look at Jalen Sneed. I mean, you don't get in the mix where even if he ends up not coming to Notre Dame, you don't get to where they're getting to where the Clemson insider is picking Notre Dame, crystal balling Notre Dame if you're not putting in the work. Now, they got to close, and the finishing part of his question, we don't know yet, but it's certainly going to be part of the strategy. And one of the things I like from Mike Elson is an emphasis on saying, hey, look, we're Notre Dame. We've been in the playoff 2 of the last 3 years. We shouldn't be backing down from anybody on the recruiting trail. If we have to back off of a kid because he doesn't fit what we're looking for, that's fine. But we're not going to back off because Ohio State's his leader or Alabama's his leader or Georgia's his leader or LSU's his leader and he happens to be from Louisiana. We're Notre Dame. We're going to make a run at it because if you don't, you have no shot at getting them, and you're definitely not going to get those guys. So, yeah, that's the plan. Will they be able to pull it off? We'll find out here over these next several months. But I love the aggressiveness. And look, I've been crushing Brian Kelly for years about his lack of recruiting effort. I have heard more stories in the last month from kids talking to Brian Kelly than I've heard in the last 5 years possibly combined. I mean, we're here in 2022, kids. 2020
or depressed by that statement. But
well, you know what? I'm gonna take the positive from it because look, here's the thing that why do I hammer Coach Kelly about certain things? Because I think that if he makes those changes, it's going to be what can take Notre Dame over the top. Because I'm someone who believes you can win a title with Brian Kelly. A lot of people that don't think, they're just like, look, he is what he is. He's taking them as far as he can take them. They're not going to win until they go hire another coach. I don't believe that because I don't think he's doing everything possible to get Notre Dame as good as he can get them. And that's why I've said go back to your roots of Cincinnati offensively with that explosive up-tempo, wanting to score points mentality. Be more aggressive on the recruiting trail because the head coach at Notre Dame carries a stigma, a persona that not many other coaches carry. And so when Brian Kelly's on the phone, it's going to carry some weight that it doesn't with most coaches. And so that's why it's like be more involved. So if he's now more involved, I'm not going to hammer him for it. I'm going to say, great, he's listening. He recognizes that that's what's needed for them to take that next step. And that's a great sign. So if we're seeing that, we're hearing Tommy Rees telling recruits about they're going to throw the ball more. These are all great signs. Now, I'm kind of in a cautious optimism thing, and we'll see it. You know, I'll wait till we see it down in Tallahassee if it's going to be there or not. But those are all positive signs, and I'm not going to, if I'm going to hammer him for doing something, then he does what I'm telling him he needs to do, or I think he should do. I'm not going to then find a negative in that. I'm going to say, look, that's great. Hopefully it continues, but so far so good. I like what I'm seeing from him.
Perfect. I'm going to let you read this one because it's a lot of initials, and I will never get them all right because it's about recruiting. But Dylan wants. You can go ahead.
The top 3 running backs Notre Dame is after, who do you think is most likely to land? I fear that that would be Gavin Sawchuk to Oklahoma, Nick Singleton to Penn State, and Dallin Hayden to Ohio State. Of those, I think Hayden complements Price's game the best. Thoughts? I think the one that I would agree with you the most on is the one of Gavin Sawchuk to Oklahoma. I think that's probably the most likely. I think Notre Dame is absolutely in the mix for Dallin Hayden and Nicholas Singleton. And Dallin Hayden was at Columbus the other day for an official visit, and then he got in his car and he came up unofficial visit, and then got in his car and came up to Notre Dame and visited the Notre Dame campus. So I think Notre Dame is absolutely in the mix for Dallin Hayden. I think that there's a Notre Dame fans are kind of just giving in that, Ohio State wants him, so we got no chance because Tony Alford always beats them. But this is a different time at Notre Dame, and let's not forget, Ohio State signed 2 top 50 running backs last year, including 5-star, Travion Henderson. So, this is a situation where
there was a second part of this one, and I want to throw it up as you're talking.
Yeah.
Because he followed up with, if that's the case, should they go after these two guys, and who do you like of those? Those five?
So I want them to continue going after the big three.
Yeah.
I don't think they need a second running back in this class. And so I'm not taking a guy that's not better than Jadarian Price. And I don't think Damari Alston and Jabron Payne are better than Jadarian Price. They're good running backs. They're 4-star running backs, but they're not better than Jadarian Price. And I just don't think you don't have to take a second running back. I would take a solid depth grad transfer before I would take that, because then you can just have another scholarship for 2023. I want them to swing for the fences. I want them to go after Dallin Hayden and Nicholas Singleton and Gavin Sawchuk. And I don't care if those guys commit to those schools. So if they committed to Notre Dame, would Ohio State stop recruiting them, or would Penn State stop recruiting them? No. So I take your shot with those big three, because I think Notre Dame is in the mix with all of them. And I think Notre Dame has an absolute legitimate chance to get Singleton and Hayden. And yes, there's a lot of smoke about them being, Penn State for Singleton and Ohio State for Hayden. But I'm not sure I buy that yet. I think those kids are very serious about Notre Dame. And now it's up to Lance Taylor and Tommy Rees and the staff to close. But I think Notre Dame is a player. And honestly, to the question, I would not go after those other two right now. I would rather Notre Dame spend between now and December trying to flip those guys if they commit somewhere else. That's what I would do.
Brian has a question here about recruiting. He says, I was wondering if the new level of recruiting is going to transition to the classroom. We all know if they can't get into class, they won't make it on the field.
Let me see. Keep that up. I'm trying to read through that question again.
All right, go ahead.
I guess I don't quite understand the question. I mean,
I don't think that they would they're not going to actively recruit guys that they know can't.
So let me kind of read into Brian's question a little bit. And I think it's, they're throwing all these offers out, that's new for Notre Dame to be throwing out sophomore offers early. So I've done some talking to different people about this, and we were kind of given a heads up before it was going to happen that we were going to see a real busy Wednesday. And the thing that I've had people tell me for a couple weeks now is this was a process that took time to get to. They didn't just wake up on Monday and say, hey, let's do a pot of gold on Wednesday and throw out a bunch of offers. And I'm not saying Brian's saying that. This is something where they've done their research. They've looked into, as best they can, the academics of these players, the backgrounds of these players, as much as they can as sophomores. I mean, a kid could be a 4.0 as a sophomore, and by the end of his senior year, he's not eligible to get into Notre Dame. A kid could be a 2.3 right now, and by the time he's a senior, could be eligible to get into Notre Dame. It's about the work. And there's always situations that kind of dictate, okay, why did this kid struggle? I had a kid, for example, that I got into school once where he had a 2.3 GPA, and I was able to convince the admissions department to take him because as a freshman, he was below a 1. I just don't know how they passed him. I don't know. But he was going through a really rough family situation. And then you saw the rest of his sophomore, junior, senior year, he was all A's and B's. And so you're able to kind of look at that and now Notre Dame's not getting a kid that's a 2.3. I'm just using my example of, they're going to look at the entire situation here. And I've seen kids get denied at Notre Dame who were originally takes, but they didn't handle their business as seniors in the classroom, and all of a sudden they got their scholarships revoked, so scholarship offers revoked. So things can always change, but they've done a lot of homework into these kids that they've offered to the point where they're at least recruitable. Right. Now, some of them may end up not being takes when it's all said and done because as they do more homework. But right now, these guys have all passed an initial test. And kudos to Notre Dame's recruiting operation for doing all that homework, because that's not easy. No. And the problem that Notre Dame's always had is they're so focused on that one class. And I talked about this on a show last night when Lou Holtz was the coach, remember how big the banquets were? Because those December postseason banquets, because Notre Dame got the vast majority of their class from December to February. That 2-month period was when most of the recruiting happened. Yeah, it's over by then. If you wait till then, now you're gonna have 8 kids in your class.
Right.
And you're gonna have it's January. Got to flip a couple Indiana State kids because we don't have anybody in our class. Right. So it's just sped up so fast, and I think Notre Dame was very slow to react to that. Mike Elson is making sure, as the recruiting coordinator, that that's not going to happen again. And I think it's nothing but positives. Now, back to Omar's question, will they finish? Will this pay off into a better recruiting class? We'll find out. But again, it's a step that we've been advocating that they need to take for years. And so now that they're taking it, and they're taking it with the weight of 2 playoff appearances in the last 3 years, it's going to have an impact. So, yeah, I do think this is going to end up paying off for Notre Dame.
Brian, this is a good question from Connor. Among the uncommitted 22 prospects who are still considering the Irish, which one would you most like to see commit to Notre Dame? And there's some people that are betting what you're going to answer. So,
let me see the bets. Yes, that would be one. Kamari Rogers would be one.
That was the major one. And then Dylan says he's definitely Brian's. So there you go.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's 100%. I mean, look, if hopefully I'm these people saying Kamari Rogers, I'm hoping that you guys are saying that because you read my Dream Class article that I wrote the other day for the defense, and obviously that's going to be guys that I would like to see them sign. So yeah, let's actually pull that up a little bit and see if you guys can see that. So here's the article I wrote at Irish Breakdown the other day, and this is sort of my dream class for the Notre Dame defense. And so all these guys that don't have commit by their names are guys that I would like to see Notre Dame sign. There's Kamari Rogers right there. Jair Brown is a cornerback committed to Ohio State. Xavier Nwankpa, Jaden Mangum, and Jake Pope are safeties that I love. Tuialamaka, and now Josh Burnham is now a commit. This was written before that. Caleb Artis and Anthony Lucas at D tackle, and DJ Wesolak at defensive end are guys that I would love to see Notre Dame sign. Now, at the time, I did not really think that Jalen Sneed was a legitimate, like, they're pushing for him, but is he I'd love to see him. I mean, you put him or Harold Perkins or Sean Murphy, you add any of those guys into that mix. What I tried to do with that dream class is guys that I actually thought Notre Dame would have a real shot to land. Even like a guy like Xavier Nwankpa, that's going to be hard. Ohio State's going to be hard to beat, but they're in it. They're a legitimate player there. So I try to make it realistic dream class. But if you sign the majority of that class that I just put up there, good luck finding a team in the country that's got a better recruiting class than Notre Dame on defense. That's big time. So those are the guys I'd like to see. Offensively, I would love to see Notre Dame land Xavier Bradshaw from Virginia. And he is a dynamic playmaker. And give me one of Andre Green or Tobias Merriweather at outside receiver. If you give me one of those two guys and Xavier Bradshaw, I'm thrilled with that. They've got to get a big offensive tackle. They've got to get a Zach Rice or a Tyler Booker. Those guys have to be in it. Give me a sleeper tackle like a Jake Taylor or George Fitzpatrick. I like those guys. And then at running back, give me one of the big three. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at, where you get those guys that I just all talked about. Now, all of a sudden, Notre Dame is a legitimate top 5 caliber recruiting class. But more importantly, besides just the recruiting rankings, that's the kind of class that's adding the impact talent at key positions: receiver, corner, safety, linebacker, defensive end, defensive tackle, where you're saying those dudes can compete against anybody. Anthony Lucas at defensive tackle for you with Gabriel Rubio, you can beat anybody. You can go to battle with anybody. You get Kamari Rogers at corner, you have guys now that can run with the Devontae Smiths of the world down the road. And that's why it's important. And that's why I love the fact that they're pushing for those kind of players in this class. They're not giving up. Yeah, is it going to be hard to get Kamari Rogers? Heck yes. Would I predict Kamari Rogers to Notre Dame right now? No. If he committed to Notre Dame tomorrow, would I feel great about him signing with Notre Dame in December? No. I'm going to feel good about him picking Notre Dame when his signature comes across. And even then, I'm going to be like, okay, which SEC team is going to try to, get him to get out? That's just how it is down there, right? Yeah. It's hard to get kids from down there. But I love the fact that they're battling for those guys. And because you're not going to get them if you don't fight for them. And I really like what this defensive staff is doing on the recruiting trail. And I'd like to see the offensive staff, be a little bit more effective in that regards. But what we're seeing on defense right now is a lot of fun. And I have confidence that I have more confidence in this defensive staff closing on recruits than I have in really defensive staff probably ever. The closest thing we saw was that 2018 staff, that 1 year with Mike Elko. He was really good. He was a really good recruiter. But now you've got Mike Elko type recruiter and Marcus Freeman, but now you've got Mike Mickens. You've got Mike Elston with what he's been able to do as a coach has now upped his profile with recruits. Because you're like, look what he's done with 4-star, 3-star players. He's turning guys like Adi Ogundeji into NFL players. Khalid Kareem was barely a top 250 guy. He's turning him into an NFL player. Julian Aguar wasn't ranked in the top 300. He turned him into an NFL player. What could he do with you? And I think that's only helped his profile. So this is a very dynamic, young defensive recruiting staff.
We got an interesting one here from Dylan, and I want to throw it out and see what your thoughts are on it. He says, can you explain why Clemson has only offered around 55 to 60 players for the class of 22, and Notre Dame is over 150? I've got a pretty good idea where you're going to go with this, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Why don't you take a shot at it, Vince?
I feel like Clemson's in a different place than Notre Dame when it comes to recruiting. They can be more selective. I mean, that's how I feel. They're down in pretty fertile territory when it comes to recruiting. They can be more selective. They don't have to put out the amount of offers that Notre Dame does to make sure that they're in on some kids. They can be selective because they know that as soon as they offer a lot of these kids, they're in the top 3 just like that.
Or they'd commit.
Well, yeah, or they commit.
Yeah,
exactly. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, it is. And I think the thing you have to think about geographically, I think it was around the 2017, 2018 season, we were having a debate about Clemson and Notre Dame recruiting. And I did a breakdown, and I don't know what it's like now. I'd imagine it's somewhat close, but they've gotten a few California kids. But I think it's like something like 75 to 80% of the scholarship players at Clemson were either from a state that bordered their state or a state that bordered a state that bordered. So like Virginia. Right. So like you're talking about like they're in South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia, and then Georgia and Florida. And then, and it was like 75 to 80% of that is from states that are within 2 states away from Notre Dame will never be able to fill a championship caliber roster with players from only that region of Indiana. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is Clemson is in a position where they don't have a lot of need for numbers in this class. It's going to be a smaller class. And so they don't need to offer as many guys. And I think this is what Notre Dame needs to do. To your point, Vince, Notre Dame's not a team that has 2 titles under their belt. If Notre Dame had 2 titles under their belt, they could be a little bit more picky when it came to recruiting. Just look what happened after the 1988 championship. When you had Vinny Serrato. I mean, all of a sudden, Notre Dame's landing like the number 1 class every year. They were just coming out of the Jerry Faust era, So when you win, it's like if you win, they'll come. I mean, that's, we should make a movie with Kevin Costner about this. You'd be the head coach of Notre Dame and win a championship, and all of a sudden they all want to come. That's just how it is, right?
To be a coach now, unfortunately, but yes, you're right. I said he can't be an athlete anymore.
Well, that's why I said coach. Let's have him be the coach. It's just a different world when you've won 2 titles, when you've been in the playoff every year that they've had a college football playoff, except for the first year. You've won 2 titles. You've put how many guys in the first round of the NFL draft? You can be a lot more picky. And I think that's where Clemson is right now. Combination of that plus smaller class is going to equal fewer offers.
Mule makes an interesting assessment here about the state of Florida. He says, now is the time to recruit in Florida, with Florida State in a state of confusion with their football program.
It's a really nice way of describing. Mule, I appreciate your kindness towards the Florida State program, because that is about as nice of a thing as you could say of their program right now.
That is a fact.
Yeah, and, Miami's not super strong right now either.
Florida is going in the right direction, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And, Miami's just kind of good, but they're not the program they used to be. They don't carry the same swagger on the recruiting trails they used to. The thing that's different now, though, than it was 20 years ago is now everybody recruits Florida. I mean, so it's not just Florida State. I mean, if it's Alabama, it's Clemson, it's Georgia, it's LSU, everybody's recruiting Florida. So you're going up against the big boys. And honestly, those teams like Alabama and Florida and Georgia are going to carry a lot more weight in that state than Florida State is right now. I would imagine. But Florida State's still going to throw some weight around. Florida's just such a unique entity. Look, I've recruited the state of Florida at different schools. I was going to play my senior year of high school football down in Florida. My high school coach, my junior year, got a D coordinator job. I was going to move down there and try to go. I had to go through an appeal process. So I went through spring ball, and I ended up, my appeal got denied. So I had to go back to Virginia. But it's just like, that's a different animal down there, man. I mean, I was at a private school, and I remember being in English class one day, and the teacher looks at me and she goes, "Hey, look, we're not doing anything important today if you want to go work out." I was like, what? Cool. It's a different world down there, man. And it's a harder place for Notre Dame to get a foothold, and it's a little harder to find the kind of guys that are going to really fit in at Notre Dame. we've seen Notre Dame's got private school guys that have come up to Notre Dame and had a hard time with that transition. So you have to be a little bit more picky in Florida. But to Mule's point, I do think that they need to try to hit it hard to where find that 2 or 3 guys that fit at Notre Dame and go get them hard. And Mule's right. This is the time to do that because Miami is not the U anymore, at least not like they were. Florida State's not, the machine that they were under Bobby Bowden. And Florida's on their way up, but it's still not the machine it was when Urban was there as the head coach.
And it's not all 3 at the same time like it was for a while. You know what I mean?
I mean, in the late 80s, early 90s, it's like they were all great. You know, I mean, Florida State, and Miami were top 10 every year.
Yeah. So if just one is great, there's still a lot of wiggle room.
But remember, Lou Holtz had success going down to Florida to get kids. I mean, Derek Brown was a starter on that national championship team from Florida. So they got plenty of Florida kids. And there are kids down there to be had, but you got to really work. I mean, you got to turn over a lot of stones and do a lot of homework. And I don't think the previous staffs had enough workers to do that. I think when you add Mike Mickens, when you add Marcus Freeman, when you add Chris O'Leary, who is going to actually be, I think, the point man in Florida, he coached at a D2 school down there. The reason that's important because recruiting at a D2 school means you need to go everywhere. Yep. You need to be in the coach's office of every school in the state if you're going to get any of those kids. True. So there's going to be some relationships there. He understands, okay, this school is going to be a little tougher. This school's the one I think we can have some success with because I know the coach. He makes the kids go to class. Whereas this coach, I know he doesn't really care about academics, so his kids aren't going to be doing what they need to do. Though that's a good thing to know. That's a good thing to have to your advantage. So I think that's where a guy like Chris O'Leary could have some success and be an asset down there. So yeah, guys are down there to be had, but it's a little tougher state than like going to Atlanta where you've got all this talent in one small area, and Atlanta has so many better schools. Like the school districts are better, especially the private schools. I mean, there's so much more loaded talent just in that Atlanta area at private schools than you're going to find in most of the state of Florida. I mean, Florida has some. I mean, there's Aquinas, there's IMG, but Atlanta's just got all these, and they're not the football powers that you see in Florida. They're just, Kyle Hamilton was from a private school. KJ Wallace, Tommy Tremble went to a private school. I think his last year he went to a private school. Guys that they're recruiting now are from private schools, and they've just had so much more success down there in Atlanta. And a lot of those kids aren't necessarily born and raised in Atlanta, where in Florida there's a lot more loyalty to staying in the South.
Right.
And there's a lot more desire to stay in the South because, a lot of those guys like me, I didn't travel. My parents didn't have the money to travel a lot. I didn't go out to California and Texas and all those places. So, our vacations were, we drove to Virginia to see family. And then when we moved to Virginia, we drove to Ohio to see family. Right. That was our vacations, Exactly. So yeah, I think that it's just a tougher haul, but there's just too much talent there to completely ignore it. And they've ignored it in recent seasons. They're not doing that now, and that's a good thing to see.
Matty K has a recruiting question that we got to throw up here. I know he probably won't commit to ND, but what are you hearing about the big tackle Rice? I thought ND was in his top 3.
I think they are in his top 3. I just don't know if they're – I mean, you could say, like, are they in his top 3? And it's like, boy, it's a really close battle between 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the case right now, but honestly, Matty, I mean, I think right now it's difficult to get a grasp on a lot of these things because he's never visited Notre Dame. And until he does, it's going to be difficult to really have a good read on where he is. I don't think he's in any hurry to commit. That's at least what I've heard, which is good. If the NCAA opens things up this summer, like we're hearing they might, that's going to be the best chance. There's going to be so much movement with kids and who they like and kids decommitting and flipping and all this kind of stuff, not at Notre Dame, just nationally when they start opening visits up again. Yeah. Because kids who maybe like Notre Dame, but, they're third or fourth, but, all of a sudden that kid gets on campus and it's like, okay, done deal. And that's what happened with Josh Burnham. He visited Notre Dame's campus, got to see the culture, and was like, yep, this is where I'm going. If he wasn't, he's able to do that because he's in driving distance from Notre Dame.
He's not that far away, right?
Lynchburg, Virginia's driving distance, but it's a long drive.
Right.
It's not a drive that you necessarily are going to just take just to do a quick, visit the campus deal when you can't meet the coaches.
What are we doing today? Oh, let's go.
Yeah, let's drive over. No, you're not going to do that. So, Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. And I'm not liking where Notre Dame is with the top tackles, Tyler Booker and Zach Rice. There's some work to do. Jake Taylor, I don't think there. I think Oklahoma leads for him right now, but they're at least within striking distance. And that's the good thing. You need to be in striking distance when things open back up again, because then it's going to be a lot easier for you to go from third to first as opposed to seventh and you're not really trying to first. Yeah. So they're putting in the work. It's just, they're just having a tough time really connecting with those kids because, again, offensive linemen care so much about the relationship with the line coach. And when you can't meet them and you can't meet them in person and you haven't been around them coaching, it's a difficult deal. So I'm not going to hammer Coach Quinn too much yet, but they need to pick it up and get back in with some of these guys. And Zach Rice is one of those types of players.
Brian, we already kind of hit the Kamari Rogers question, but we've kind of got an either or here for you from Jack. He goes, who's a more important target for the Irish staff? Who do you think would be better pick up, Anthony Lucas or Kamari Rogers?
See, Jack's hurting me right now because he knows those are my top two guys on defense right now. Honestly, Jack, I'd say Kamari Rogers. And look, I think Anthony Lucas is a game changer at defensive tackle, but that hasn't really been an issue for Notre Dame. Finding really good defensive tackles hasn't been an issue for Notre Dame. I mean, they've got Gabriel Rubio. They've got Jason Adamiola they were able to get. Riley Mills is a top guy. Jacob Lacey was a top recruit. They've been able to get really good defensive tackles. Recruiting elite corners has been a much more difficult challenge. So that's the only reason I'd go with Kamari Rogers is because he's more of a rare pickup for Notre Dame than Anthony Lucas. I think even Tyson Ford is a top 100 defensive end that's already 6'5", 250. We don't know if he's not going to outgrow defensive end and eventually play inside a defensive tackle. So I believe in defensive tackles incredibly important to an elite defense. We've talked about this, but I think Notre Dame's done a pretty darn good job with Mike Elson in recent seasons of identifying, recruiting, and landing top defensive tackles. I mean, we talked when we did our preview of we expect this to be a strength of the team this season. They're 3-4 deep there. They're not 3-4 deep in, top players at corner. They've got a couple guys we hope pan out, but after that, it's like, fingers crossed. I hope Ramon Henderson's better than I think he's going to be kind of thing. Kamari Rogers changes all of that. I mean, he is a legitimate elite 5-star caliber player, and that's just not a position where Notre Dame has been landing a lot of those types of guys.
All right, I'm gonna ask this question, and then I've got to bug out here. But this is a really good one, and you and I kind of talked about it when I don't know if we were talking about the secondary or we were talking about Kyle Hamilton or what. But John says, what has to happen to put Hamilton at the rover position? Will that better highlight his skill set? How on the roster spring fall can or who? I'm guessing that's meant to be who on the roster in the spring fall can step up enough to cover the responsibility Hamilton leaves at safety. And I'm going to get my 2 cents in here before I take off. The issue isn't where is his best skill set. The issue is the depth chart at safety. If you take Kyle Hamilton away from safety, who are you replacing him with? And that's a huge question mark. And that would be too big of a drop off to experiment with Kyle Hamilton at rover, in my opinion.
I agree. I also think that I still prefer a guy like Kyle Hamilton to be a guy that's further away from the ball. I think you can be more versatile with him. You can move. It's harder to move a rover around. You kind of always want to have him as that field player.
Right.
As a back end safety, whether it's a free or a strong boundary field, whatever, I just feel like there's more value to Kyle Hamilton specifically. Now, what I have said before is if you could give me a couple Kyle Hamiltons, I'm going to move one of them down to rover. And I think Kyle Hamilton could be a great rover. I just don't think Notre Dame is anywhere near good enough at those other positions. Even if Houston Griffith is everything I think it could be, it's like, okay, well, he's got one of those spots. Where's the other one going? You know, and I just don't see the talent and the depth at that position after the first couple guys that says you can do that. And I think playing rover would allow defenses to avoid Kyle Hamilton a little bit more than they can as him as a safety. And you could have maybe got away with that if you had another Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah playing somewhere, but they don't have that. So I get it, John. I'm so intrigued of the thought of Kyle Hamilton being a rover. I think we've talked about this before. He'd have 80+ tackles, 13+ tackles for loss, 4 or 5 sacks. I mean, he'd be a monster there, but I just don't think you have there's just no one that has the talent, in my opinion, to step up and be good enough, because this is safety is a very important position. It's not as safety driven as it was before, but it's still a very important position in this defense. And I just don't think you can take the chance of moving Kyle Hamilton unless you've got another Kyle Hamilton type of player behind him. And Notre Dame just doesn't have that. So Vince, you got to roll. I'm going to wrap up these last couple questions here.
152, just over there, the time wise is where the comments were. So
gotcha.
Letting you know. All right, everybody. Thank you. I love it. And I'll be sure to talk to you guys soon. Thanks, guys.
Here's a team question. Don't we need Reese to run more RPOs on offense? Yes. That is one of those things we talked about earlier would be a big part of Notre Dame being more effective on offense is to have more RPOs, just being a more dynamic, getting the ball in the perimeter. Notre Dame has to do more to attack the perimeter of the opposing defenses with things other than the run game. That's really what it comes down to. Here we go. Ryan Horn. Think we're in trouble if Mayer has a sophomore slump or an injury. Talent-wise, I think they'll be okay. I mean, it's like, is anybody else on the roster as good as Michael Mayer? No. But when you've got George Takis and Kevin Bauman and even the freshman Kane Barong, you've got enough talent, in my opinion, at tight end you're still going to be pretty good there. You're not going to have that guy that's going to be your alpha that we've talked about that Michael Mayer could be, but you're going to have plenty of talent at that position and they'll be fine. He won't be that new guy won't be their number one player, but they'll be fine. And honestly, I'm not overly concerned with Michael Mayer seeing a sophomore slump. I just think that position is too important. I think he's too talented. I don't see that happening. But an injury is the thing that I think I'm more concerned about because that's the kind of thing where you could see a scenario in which there's just not going to be the same level of production, but the production will still be good enough to complement the other receivers. But what would happen there, Ryan, is you'd have to have, now there's more pressure on the receivers to step up. There's more pressure on a Kevin Austin or Jordan Johnson to step up, for Avery Davis to take his game to another level, for Braden Lindsey to be more impactful, things along those lines. Those things would have to happen if Notre Dame is going to be effective with Michael Mayer going down. Let's see here if we have a couple more questions here. Yes. David Knight asks, is there any way on God's green earth we can get Singleton and Hayden? I'm guessing not, but is it even possible? It's not possible numbers wise. Notre Dame doesn't have the room and scholarship room to be able to do that. That's just not a move. That I think that they could make. Let's see here. See, Brian, we asked that question. Yeah, here we go. Running back. I'll be upset if we don't get to see Audric Estime truck people this season. Potentially. But I would say Logan Diggs is even more physical as a senior than Estime was. If just kind of what I saw from them on senior film, Audric will hit people. Don't get me wrong. Well, the thing I like about both of them is they can also make people miss. They're not going to make a living out of it, but Audric Estime's got some Tony Jones in him. Tony had great feet. And go ask USC about him making people miss when they did it. So let's go back here. A couple thing here. All right, Jack Sullivan, we got to your question. Here we go. Dylan Hoffman, love at your dream class. I love Brown and Rogers. Was wondering why Keenan Nelson does not get mentioned. Does Indy have no interest? He has tightened coverage and looks to enjoy tackling. Couple things as to why Keenan Nelson. He's from I think he goes to St. Joseph's Prep in Philly, but he's a Philly kid. He's a good player. I like Keenan Nelson. Number one, I don't think Notre Dame's a legitimate player for him right now. I'm hearing a lot about Penn State with him. You look at the crystal balls and the trending and things like that. I haven't really got specific information. To me, it's more stuff I see it at 24/7 and see on Twitter. But I also don't think he necessarily fits that kind of cornerback that I'm looking for per se, like a Kamari Rogers. The reason I mentioned Brown over Nelson, so Kamari Rogers is just a different player than Nelson. He is a pure cover guy. He, to me, is arguably the best corner in the country, and he certainly has, in my opinion, the highest ceiling of any cornerback in the country. So he is in a different stratosphere. I think with Brown and Nelson, if they got Nelson instead of Brown, I'd be fine with that. I'd be happy about that. The reason he doesn't get mentioned is I think Notre Dame made his top 12, but if I had to guess, they're in his bottom 5 as opposed to being near the top. Now, if that changes, obviously we'll let you know, but right now I just don't see that as being as being a I think it's going to be a little tougher. All right, here we go. Brandon asks, what about Cyrus Moss? Brian loves him. Yes, I do. I think he's a dynamic player, and I just don't think Notre Dame right now is a legitimate player for him. I think they've tried, but I think the fact that he hasn't been able to get on campus has kind of have them on the outside looking in. Now, the encouraging thing is I did a little digging on this last week, and they're going to continue to recruit Cyrus Moss to the end. The reason that they're pushing for other ends right now is because they're being realistic about where they stand with Cyrus Moss, and they can't put all their eggs in the Cyrus Moss basket and then miss out on other players. What I think you'll see them do is if they can get another top end, a DJ Wesolak, a Teva Tafidi, a guy like that, they're not going to stop recruiting Cyrus Moss, and they'll make room for him. So that I like. I do like that strategy. I would rather them see them do that than to see a situation where they pass on guys. So that's kind of where I'm at with that one. Here we go. Tafidi or Wesolak, Sneed or Cheeks, do you think it'll come down to one or the other with either of those skill positions? I think it will. Tafidi and Wesolak. I think there's a scenario in which you could take Sneed and Cheeks, because we talked about this with Josh Burnham. Josh Burnham can play Mike linebacker, so then you have Sneed and Cheeks could play those other positions and could play together. I just think if Tuihalamaka commits, then now it comes down to Sneed or Cheeks. There's been a lot of mention about Notre Dame taking 5 linebackers in this class. I'd love to see it if you can get the right 5. I just don't know how you can make that work scholarship numbers wise. I think Notre Dame's going to have a hard time getting that number at linebacker and still meeting their needs at running back, offensive line, defensive line, corner, safety, and all those types of things. Let's see if we have any. DBZ. Here we go. If the offensive philosophy changes, do you think we can have 2,000-yard rushers and a 1,000-yard receiver? I don't about the first one. Definitely. I think if they ran an offense like North Carolina's, where it's about a volume of plays, go tempo, push the tempo, be an RPO team, be a team that's going to really look to attack and be explosive. Could they have 2,000-yard backs? Absolutely. Kyron Williams got 1,000 last year. He would get 1,000, and then Chris Tyree could get 1,000. But the thing about Chris Tyree is he doesn't need as many touches to get to 1,000. And when you looked at North Carolina's running backs last year, Kyron Williams were averaged 5.3 yards per carry. And when you look at North Carolina with those two backs they had, because you're talking, I think what you're pointing to when I think of your question, DBC, is that I think of North Carolina, because that's exactly what they had last year. They had 2,000-yard running backs in Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, and then De'Ami Brown had 1,000 yards receiving. Michael Carter averaged 8 yards a carry, and Javonte Williams averaged 7.3 yards per carry. I think what would happen is you wouldn't see Kyron Williams necessarily get more touches. You just see him be more efficient and explosive with those touches because the offense would give him more room to work because they're protecting things a little bit more. And then when you look at like receiving, they had De'Ami Brown at 1,000 yards. He barely went over 1,000 in 11 games. That's pretty good. I think Notre Dame's going to be a little bit more spread out with their production. North Carolina had a bunch of guys at over 200 yards. They only had 2 guys at over 400 yards. I think Notre Dame would spread the ball around a little bit more. I think Notre Dame's backs would get a lot of touches, as did North Carolina's. But you also, in the tight ends, it's hard to get 1,000 yards as a tight end, and Notre Dame's best receiver is going to be a tight end next year. So if it happens and we do get 1,000-yard receiver and 2,000-yard backs, Notre Dame is going to go undefeated in the regular season. And I would say that Notre Dame team, is going to have a chance to play with anybody, because I think the talent is there for them to be a dynamic offense. And if they're getting that kind of production at running back and receiver, that tells me this team is scoring well over 40 points a game and has really put it all together. And the offensive line's has grew up quickly, and Jack Cohn has made, it's all things would have to kind of go right for that to happen. Tracy Tipton, who is our best chance of landing a top wide receiver? For me, it's Tobias Merriweather, Andre Green, or 2 guys that are top receivers from a ranking standpoint. I think Tobias Merriweather's a top 100 guy. Andre Green's a top 150 guy. Those are very, very good players. Those are guys that I view as needle mover type of outside receivers. But I honestly graded Xavier Bradshaw out as better than all of them. Than both of those guys. He is a special player. Yes, he's a 3-star player, so I wouldn't call him a top player from a recruiting ranking standpoint, Tracy, but what I would count him as a top player when I look at him. He is a Jeremiah Wusu kind of guy that, yes, he may not be highly ranked, but good Lord, that's some serious athleticism and talent there. And he just knows how to play football. So I would say that would be something that I would look at and say, those would be guys. If you give me Xavion Bradshaw, and either Tobias Merriweather and Andre Green, I'm happy with that receiving core. When you complement it with Deion Colsey and Lorenzo Styles and Jane Thomas last year, and then Jordan Johnson, Xavier Watson, Jay Brunell the year before, that's 3 years in a row of really, really good wide receiver play. So I would be very, very happy with that. Jack Sullivan asks, Blake Fisher looks very lean from all the photos posted on Twitter, which I think is a good sign. What are the chances he gets the Hainsey treatment this season? I would not have any problem seeing that. Whether it's at tackle or guard, I don't care. If Blake Fisher is ready to play, then you find a role for him. Because look, Jack, I think you would agree with this. If Blake Fisher's as good as and you and I have talked about Blake Fisher, if he's as good as we think he is, he's not playing 5. You're hoping he stays 4 years. He's definitely not staying 5. And so, yeah, get him some work. Get him an opportunity. Use him, like you mentioned, to Robert Hainsey. And even if you're not going to go every other series, at least maybe every third, every fourth at tackle or guard, get him on the field because he can be a difference maker. I mean, he was my number 1 ranked offensive recruit. He's the kind of guy that could be, he could be your next All-American, your next great All-American. And he's a big physical kid. He's athletic for his size. He is one of those guys that's going to be very hard to keep off the field. And I would like to see him be treated on the offensive line like we've talked about with Tyler Buckner, which is even if you don't think he's good enough or not good enough, even if you don't think he's ready to start, you still find a role for him because when the light goes on for him, he's not just a good blocker. He could be a great elite blocker. He could be a Ronnie Stanley. He could be a Quentin Nelson. He could be a Mike McGlinchey, a Liam Eichenberg, meaning he is just that elite, dominant, all-American caliber player. And, you need that on the offensive line. You absolutely need that. See if you have any other questions. Here we go. All right. Avery Davis, James Taylor. I think is this you, Trey? Because you saw that Waffle House comment earlier, so we'll still go to Waffle House. I just can't drink pop with it. Avery Davis coming back to school. Do you feel based off recent history that automatically would take away from younger, more talented players? Based on what we've seen, yeah. I mean, him coming back means that they're not going to play other guys. I'm hoping that they don't do that. I'm hoping that they use him in different ways, but also use more rotation. And that's also partly why I really want to have them push the tempo, because you'll see them get 5 to 8 extra snaps per game if they push the tempo. And what that does is it does 2 things. Number 1, that's 5 to 8 more reps that you can split up from other players. Number 2, I think you're going to see them blow teams out more. The teams that they've been beating 31-13 and 27-13 are teams they're going to blow out more, which then gives them an opportunity for more games to get those young players in the game. And then that's when your chance, hey, this guy got in the fourth quarter of this game and he really looked good. And that's one of the things that helped Ian Book back in 2017, if you remember. He got in some of those games against Miami of Ohio and in some of those early season blowout games, and he did some nice things, had a nice long, I think it was Miami of Ohio, he had a really long run and looked impressive. And so it's like, hey, this kid's got a shot. So then when Brandon Wimbush started to struggle, they felt confident putting Ian Book in the game. Didn't work out well at first against Miami, but by the time we got to the bowl game, we saw what he was able to do against LSU. So yeah, that's what I thought. Don't worry, we'll still next time we're in the same city, we'll still do Waffle House. I'll just have to have water or milk or something instead of pop. So I think that is it. Tracy says, I have a feeling Blake Fisher will be a top 10 or top 5 pick. That's exactly what I agree. I mean, he's got that kind of talent, Tracy. And that's the thing is you get him ready to play. You get him out there, you give him that opportunity, and you say, look, what kind of mentality do you have? What kind of mental toughness do you have? Do you have the ability to go out there and maybe you're not at your best, but you're still going to give me your best effort and be effective and be successful? Then he has the mental makeup that you need. And that's how you really challenge a guy more than anything, is to do that. And so I want to see him get that opportunity. I mean, look, it's not like he's not physically ready to play. He's 330 pounds. So I absolutely think he's ready to play. It's just mentally how quickly he's going to pick up the scheme and the coaching. And that's always something you look at with offensive linemen, because offensive line is such more of a technical driven position, where at receiver, it's like, okay, maybe guys in a great route runner, he only knows 3 or 4 plays. You get him out there and you let him execute those 3 or 4 plays. If an offensive lineman only knows 3 or 4 plays, and you can't just run those 3 or 4 plays for an entire game, now all of a sudden, he's getting your quarterback hurt, or he's getting your running back drilled and things like that. You need a guy that can execute at a higher level than you can at another position. But I do think there's a need to say, hey, look, if let's teach him a few things, and for a few series a game, we can work on there and we can really hammer the zones and the play actions and things like that. And then as he gets more and more comfortable in the offense, you can have him then take that next step. Robert Hainsey was a different case because he was an IMG guy. He was really well schooled when it came to the mental part of the game as well. And so that's why he had a leg up on most of the guys that have come to Notre Dame. And I mean, Quentin Nelson didn't play as a freshman. Mike McGlinchey didn't play as a freshman. Liam Eichenberg didn't play as a freshman. Nick Martin didn't play as a freshman. Ronnie Stanley barely saw the field as a freshman. So it would be unique, and it's why it doesn't happen very often. But I think Blake Fisher is the kind of guy that would have the ability to do so. And I think Rocco Spindler could help out as a freshman too, especially inside, because there's a lot more question marks inside at guard than there are at tackle right now. So it looks like that is it. If any of you that are listening have any more questions as I scroll through these to make sure I didn't miss any, feel free to ask. I want to make sure I get all your questions. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here soon. Let's see here. We got the question about Hamilton at Rover, Keenan Nelson, Kamari Rogers, or Anthony Lucas. I think we got all of these. All right, Mule Skinner, and we got your question about Florida. I got it. Yep. I think we have everything that you guys asked about. If I missed something and you asked earlier, give it to me again, and I will ask it. Let's see here. Wrapping up. I believe that's it. So that's it for the questions today. If you guys don't have anything else, that is going to do it for today's show. Obviously, make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. Hit that notifications bell so that way you are alerted every time we put a new video up. Subscribe to the Irish Breakdown podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and check out irishbreakdown.com. I had a meeting this past week. I think we're very, very close to getting a message board back on our site, which I'm very excited about. So keep an eye out for that here over these next couple of weeks. I really, really hope that we get back to that. I also had an idea I wanted to run by y'all, and you let me know if this is something you're interested in. What I thought is we could do some shows where maybe we could, break down some film, just get on. Hey, look, we're going to talk about Dante Moore, the 2023 quarterback. And I'm just going to put the film up and we're going to talk through the film. And here's what I like. And here's those kind of things. This is more technical driven. So I would love some feedback on Twitter or Facebook, or just hit me up with a private email or message and let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Dylan Hoffman, real quick, asked a question. Got in late, Dylan. Will Buckner pass Pine on the depth chart this year, in your opinion? I don't know. I think it's certainly possible. I think Tyler Buckner's obviously talented enough to do that, but Drew Pine's not going to go down without a fight. And I know he doesn't have the size. He's not the runner and all that, but that's a really smart kid that knows how to throw the football. He is not going to go down and just easily get passed over like I think a lot of people are thinking he will. That doesn't mean Tyler Buckner won't eventually pass him up, because Tyler Buckner is a special talent. But if Tyler Buckner passes up Drew Pine as a freshman, that means Tyler Buckner's legit, because Drew Pine's a really good football player. So I'll look into that. We'll try those out. We'll try some of those film breakdowns. I'll probably do them at night, just because I think more people will be able to spend some time on it and allows us to get through some work. So I'm going to look into that and just kind of do like a live film room. And we'll break those things down and go from there. So if you guys like that, be on the lookout. I'm going to put some up on Twitter about that here soon. We may try that next week and just see what kind of attendance we get and see how it goes. So let me know. And then what we can do is can ask questions afterwards and those kind of things. And say, hey, look, I broke down the film. If you have a question while we're watching it, if things like that, we can do it. So I think that'd be a lot of fun if that's something you guys are interested in. I love watching film. So of course we'll do that. So anyway, everybody have a great, great weekend. All the guys and gals that listen to the show, Doy Bird, I told you we're going to give you some love. I didn't see a question from you, but I know you're watching, and we appreciate ladies like you that watch our show, and really appreciate you guys being a part of this community. We're really trying to grow it, and it's grown a ton this last month. I mean, our site, we're already past in March. We're already past where we were last March in page views. We've tripled our numbers on our YouTube subscription. Our podcast is really going off. I mean, we went a couple days where we didn't have a podcast and our numbers were still getting downloads because people were listening, and we're so appreciative of that from y'all, especially this off season. We really appreciate your guys' loyalty to what we're doing and just being a part of what we're doing. And it makes it a lot more fun. So thank you all for being a part of the show. We will be back with y'all very soon. Have a great, safe weekend. Hopefully it's good weather where you guys are, and we'll talk to you soon about Notre Dame football.